I'd also like to thank the organizers, although my topic isn't quite as interesting as some of the others, because I get to talk about a meta-analytic nerd question of whether general versus population-specific meta-analyses are better. And so the first thing I'm going to do is ask you to vote. This is a participatory presentation. And so how many of you vote for population or setting-specific meta-analyses? Raise your hand. Okay. And how many of you vote for general? Okay. And how many of you didn't vote? I think the didn't votes won. But let me talk about both of these. Okay, certainly there are advantages to having more specific meta-analyses. For example, a career counselor working with African American clients could search databases like Info for meta-analysis of career interventions with African Americans. A recent search of Info with the keyword meta-analysis identified over 16,000 studies. It might be difficult for a career counselor to review each of these studies in the hopes of identifying a pertinent meta-analysis. Thereby, a clinician could simply enter the terms African American and career interventions and theoretically identify a meta-analysis, if such meta-analysis existed, that could inform the clinician on the types of career interventions that are associated with larger effect sizes. The clinician could then adopt those interventions shown to be most effective with African American clients and provide evidence-based practice. Although such meta-analysis does not currently exist, its usefulness is evident as many researchers have called for an exploration of the efficacy of career interventions with ethnic and racial minorities. Not only is there a need for specific information regarding the effectiveness of career interventions with racial and ethnic minorities, but there may also be other demographic variables that would benefit from these specific meta-analysis, such as gender, as we do not know which career interventions tend to be more effective with women versus men and vice versa. Other demographic variables that might benefit from specific meta-analysis include socioeconomic status, and in particular investigating the effective interventions for those in poverty. In psychotherapy research, let me see where I'm at. I've lost my place. In psychotherapy research, many of the specific meta-analyses have centered on diagnoses such as exploring which interventions are most effective with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Therefore, vocational psychologists may want to follow in the footsteps of psychotherapy researchers and conduct specific meta-analysis of common career diagnoses. There are, however, no commonly used diagnostic systems in the career area, although there have been calls for such criteria. Although career issues cover a wide gamut of issues like work-family conflict, etc., much of the empirical focus has been on career decision-making, which might be a ripe area for specific meta-analysis. Sampson 2008 and Sampson et al. 2004 argued that career interventions should be structured to the type and level of clients' readiness for career decision-making. Interestingly, there's not even a specific meta-analysis that has investigated interventions for clients who are indecisive. Sampson et al. 2013 identified variables affecting readiness to benefit from career interventions that could serve as a foundation for diagnosing clients who lack readiness for career decision-making. Sampson et al. Schema includes personal characteristic, personal circumstances, limited knowledge of self, options, and decision-making, and prior experiences with career interventions. Whereas population-specific meta-analyses are pretty easy to conduct if there are a sufficient number of studies that evaluate the effectiveness of career interventions with that population. Setting-specific meta-analyses are a little more complex. As an example of a setting-specific meta-analysis would be studying the interventions typically provided at a career development center. Sometimes career development center personnel conduct evaluation studies of the interventions they provide, and it's pretty easy to determine that they fall under the umbrella of services typically provided by a career development center. Other times, however, researchers may be conducting the study without the assistance of career development center personnel, and it may be more difficult to determine if the intervention studied is really typically a service of career development centers. Moreover, there's probably debate within career development centers on what is typical services. Therefore, it's difficult to identify the population of studies that should be included in a meta-analysis of career development centers, which is true of other settings such as private practice. The problems associated with conducting setting-specific studies, however, does not diminish the importance of these meta-analyses. A setting-specific meta-analysis, such as the one conducted with career development centers, could be shared with appropriate administrators to show the effectiveness of such sites. Such meta-analysis could influence the provision of services also, because persons could develop, increase the degree to which they provide interventions associated with large effect sizes, and decrease or eliminate the interventions with associated with small effect sizes. Brown and Ryan Crane stated that there is no need for another general meta-analysis of career interventions, as there is already sufficient documentation of the effectiveness of career interventions in general. Cooper and Hedges, however, disagree with Brown and Ryan Crane and suggest that conceptually broad topics frequently benefit from meta-analysis, particularly when there are sufficient studies to contribute to these research synthesis. When making a decision to pursue a conceptually narrow meta-analysis, or one that is broader, the researcher first should consider the target audience for the study. The second consideration concerns the number of studies and whether broadening the topic causes a project to become unwieldy. According to Cooper, one of the advantages of more general meta-analysis is that rival hypotheses can often be examined. With any meta-analysis, there needs to be a relationship between the concepts being examined and the operational definitions of those concepts. The advantage of starting broad is the researcher may find similar concepts from another discipline or literature that can be included in the meta-analysis because of its relevant operational definition. As an example, a meta-analytic researcher may be interested in the effectiveness of career assessments. That researcher could start the project by only looking at studies of interest inventories and ability assessments, but find values assessments in the literature, and want to broaden the meta-analysis to include measures of values. Thus, the robustness of the meta-analysis is increased by the addition of values assessment. Therefore, Cooper recommends starting the literature search with the broadest conceptual definition possible in an attempt to include any relevant studies, and that unrelated studies can later be eliminated. One of the problems, however, with broader general meta-analyses is that erroneous conclusions can be drawn from very broad categories. To address this problem, researchers should be very thorough in their attention to and coding of study characteristics, because it's possible to analyze data according to these study characteristics. For example, we may find that the broad area of using career assessments with clients produces positive outcomes, but we may be more interested in whether interest inventories, skills and abilities assessment, or values measures produce the largest effect size. This can be accomplished through moderator analyses. One of the advantages of general meta-analysis is the ability to systematically examine several sources of variation in the effectiveness of an intervention. For example, study A and B may vary simply because of sampling error, differences in the quality of the research, participants' differences, intervention characteristics, or differences among outcome measures. In conducting a meta-analysis, the researcher typically conducts a statistical test of homogeneity to determine whether the differences in the effect sizes are due to sampling error. If the results of this test indicate that the variation in effect size is due to sampling error, then no further exploration of moderators are needed, and one simply concludes that the variation in effect size is due to sampling error. For example, if we were doing a meta-analysis of the effectiveness of career assessments, and the test indicated that the effect sizes are homogeneous, then we would conclude that the variation in effect size is due to sampling error, and not to differences in whether the assessment was of interest, skills and abilities, or values. If, on the other hand, the effect sizes are not homogeneous, then the test of moderators can be conducted as the variance in effect size is due to something more systematic than sampling error. Therefore, when there's an indication of heterogeneity of effect sizes, the researcher can investigate whether those differences are due to research methodology, types of participant, types of interventions, or outcome measures, assuming that the researcher has adequately coded for these variables. Hence, analysis of moderator variables allows the researcher to go from general findings to more specific findings. This returns us to the question of whether it's better to start with a specific meta-analysis or to hope for a certain level of specificity in a general meta-analysis using moderator variables. The answer to this question depends on the research questions of the researcher and the quality of the studies being analyzed. Certainly, the research questions dictate the preference in specific versus general meta-analyses. For example, for questions related to certain populations, then a more narrowly defined meta-analysis is probably best. As indicated earlier, there are needs for meta-analyses in the career area related to specific populations, and researchers are encouraged to pursue these types of meta-analyses. There's also needs for specific meta-analyses related to particular diagnoses, but there needs to be more consensus within the field regarding diagnostic systems. On the other hand, there's also the need for general meta-analyses that are appropriate, that use appropriate moderator variables. There is probably not a need for another general meta-analysis that simply examines the effectiveness of career interventions. A good example of a general meta-analysis that use moderator analyses to provide pertinent information is Brown and Ryan Crane, which was talked about earlier by Steve. Brown and Ryan Crane looked at the effectiveness of career interventions and then examined the effects of specific types of interventions. They found that certain types of interventions, particularly used in combination, are associated with larger effect sizes. And those effect sizes are whimsy, or what we know as written exercise, individual interpretation and feedback, occupational information, modeling, and attention to building support. This meta-analysis is somewhat dated, and replicating it would be a good contribution to the research. In conclusion, the answer to the question of whether specific or more general analyses are better is simply it depends. In fact, I think it depends is the answer to many of life's questions, but that's just me. Certainly, the field could benefit from both population-specific and setting-specific meta-analytic studies. The field could also benefit from general meta-analyses in which pertinent moderators are used. One of the problems, however, is the dearth of research studies conducted on research on career interventions, which hampers our ability to conduct both specific and general meta-analyses. Therefore, let me conclude this presentation with a call for more research on career interventions. In particular, what we need is programmatic research that focuses on what interventions work with which clients under what circumstances. This is not a novel call, as Fred's made the same plea almost 35 years ago, but its relevance and importance continues through today. So thank you.